here. Sources, Player's Handbook. So basically, this is just going to be going through some of the rules and my views on Dungeons and Dragons in general. Um, it's not going to be much gameplay. Might try and get something going depending on how many people tune into the stream. But for the most part, it's just going to be the rules and my views on that. If you have questions at all while we're doing this, feel free to let me know either in the chat or if you want to join in on the Discord, we can get you in on the voice chat as well, and we can talk that way. But without further ado, let's get started. So, what is Dungeons and Dragons? So, Dungeons and Dragons is, in my opinion, one of the greatest games of all time. And the reason I think that is because of how versatile it is, how different things can be. Once you take the core mechanic and you kind of strip that down, then what you're left with is something that can go whatever way you want. Really, it's up to the discretion of your dungeon master which way you want to go with that. And a good dungeon master will make it fun for everyone involved. And I hope that I am a good dungeon master. I haven't had really any complaints from the people I've ran campaigns with before, but that might just have been because they have decided to not mention anything to me. But hopefully, it is because I'm doing a good job. Um, Sorry, just checking on something. So that is what I think. And the other thing that I find really, really good about Dungeons and Dragons is that it is at its core group storytelling. So yes, the dungeon master, kind of brings the world together, figures out what the rules of the world are and all that, but at its heart, they are just there to guide the players as the players tell their own story. And that's when things really get good, is when a player character or is when all the player characters are invested in the role play and are actually driving the story. It's nice for the dungeon master when they can sit back a little bit from everything, and just let the player characters run. Just let them do what they, want to do, and just offer little nudges, to keep the storyline going. But hi, Scooby. Um, and just manage the non-player characters. That is the goal when you're playing a game like this. With that in mind, we're going to talk about some of the structure that comes with um, playing Dungeons and Dragons. So the main mechanic that you're looking at is you're looking at your ability scores and the associated modifiers with them. So an ability score, actually, let me pull up one of my not sources, collections, my characters. Let me pull up one of we'll view this one. So Character not ready. What? Fine. We'll view this one. I would like to view it in. No, why are you showing me this? I want to view the character sheet, the actual character sheet. All right, we'll do it that way. All right, so that is what a character sheet looks like in general. So when we're talking about ability scores and their modifiers, what we're talking about are these on the side here. So you have strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Strength, as one would imagine, is how much power you can put into something. So strength affects how much you can carry. It affects how good you are at breaking things down or moving, heavy objects, stuff like that. If you can think of something that it would require being strong to do, then that is going to be the ability score that matches up with that particular task. Then you have dexterity. Dexterity is another physical thing, but it is all about, that fine motor skill stuff. So if you're trying to, let's say, run across a rickety bridge, you might need to have some dexterity, make a dexterity check to then be able to uh, successfully run across that bridge. Or if you're trying to, pick a lock or something like that, you might have to, use dexterity because it's such a fine motor skill that you need to use. Um, Constitution is basically just how much extra hit points, for the most part. For the most part, it is how much extra hit points you will get when you level up. So that is, basically, I think other games refer to it as fortitude or something like that. So it's how resistant you are to other to negative effects, as well as improving as you level up, improving your maximum health. Intelligence and wisdom are pretty similar. So intelligence is more about learned information, so stuff that you have studied and know that way. Where wisdom is more along the lines of um, your innate uh, mental capacity. So if we look just to the right of it here, we can see different things that'll take intelligence. So in Arcana check, we'll take intelligence. Same thing with history, investigation, all that, religion. So stuff like that is intelligence, whereas wisdom is stuff like survival. So survival, perception, so how you perceive other players or non-player characters, monsters, stuff like that. Medicine, insight, so stuff that is a little more intuitive and not just fact-based, as it were. A good uh, a good differentiation between intelligence and wisdom is, let's say you're searching a room and you use your intelligence modifier, you might see that there are scratches somewhere, but not necessarily know. Actually, sorry, let me reverse that. Wisdom is probably that you'd see the scratches on something, but you might not know that that might indicate that there is a hidden room or something was moved there recently. Whereas intelligence might reveal that, where wisdom wouldn't. They are very, very similar. The main difference between them being these skills that they're associated with, as well as which stat a particular class will use uh, as their, what do you call it, spell modifier. So some of them use intelligence, while others will use wisdom. And then last is charisma. Charisma, as it sound just like it sounds, is all about stuff that will make you um, either endeared or not endeared to other creatures in the game world. Examples of charisma over here is performance. So if you're trying to, put on a performance, whether it's a small mini play to distract a king while your fellow player characters sneak into his treasure chamber, or if you're trying to persuade somebody, so if there's a locked door and you're trying to persuade a guard to let you in or intimidate a guard to let you in. Stuff like deception, how good of a liar are you? Those are all tied to your charisma skill. So each skill will have a skill value. So that's this number in the circle here. So 12, 14, 12, 12, 13, and 12, which is very average. I guess slightly above average. And each of those corresponds with a particular modifier. So 12s is plus 1, 14 is plus 2. And if we look back here at the player's handbook, you'll see that each particular ability score matches up with a particular modifier. So as your ability score gets higher, then you're going to have a higher and higher modifier. Typically, as a player character, you're going to end up somewhere in the 10 to 18 range on an ability score. You might get higher based on racial features or class features that might boost that, but I wouldn't really expect to get higher than 20. 20 is basically the upper cap, and I can't remember if it says that the most you can get is 20. Yeah, so 18 is the highest person usually reaches. Adventurers can have scores as high as 20. So yeah, so wouldn't really expect to get more than 20 for that. So at most, you're really going to have a modifier of, plus 5. There might be specific things in a particular situation that might boost your ability score modifier. That might give you a little bit higher on that, but really you're in this, -5 to +5 range, more or less. With that, what that refers to is actually something that's going to modify a dice roll. The die roll are usually on a d20. So anytime it's a 20-sided die, anytime you're hearing someone talk about d20 or something like that, or d6, d4, d8, d10, those are all refer to the sides of the dice that basically gives you an idea of what the average value will be and what maximum and minimums you can expect. For all dice, the minimum is 1. The maximum is whatever the number of faces is on there. So, D4, the maximum you could get is 4. D6, it's your regular dice. The maximum you can get is 6. So there's a D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, D20, and D100. So the D100 is basically more or less a percentile dice, and it's about usually a large range of potential effects that'll happen. You'll roll the percentile dice and get in there. Well, hello, dog. So that is ability scores. So anytime that you're asked to make an ability check, so that would be any of these things. So you say something like, I want to pull myself up that rope. Well, you're going to make a strength check to try and pull yourself up that rope. And so you'll roll a d20 and you'll add 1 to whatever that result is. and then you'll compare that to whatever difficulty class has been assigned to that particular task. So let's say it's a, you know, maybe one story and you're not carrying a bunch of stuff, you're just pulling yourself up. You might have a, difficulty class of say 10 or 12 on that difficulty class. You just have to get 10 or, higher than whatever that difficulty class that the dungeon master is assigned to be able to succeed at that particular task. If you get lower than that, generally you'll either simply fail or you might fail spectacularly, which means that you'll probably end up injuring yourself or another party member or breaking the rope so you can't use the rope anymore. There's different negative things that can occur when you fail a check. You also might succeed spectacularly. So typically, those are referred to as critical successes and critical fails. So a critical success is a natural 20 rolled on the d20, and a critical fail is a natural 1 rolled on the d20. Usually, a critical success will come with some extra benefit, or the dungeon master will describe very, very in a spectacular manner what it is that you particularly accomplish. So if you're trying to climb that rope and you roll a natural 20, the dungeon master is like, you decide to show off to all of your friends and heave yourself up the rope, all 3 stories with one single hand. When you get to the top, you're feeling very proud about yourself and just look down at the mere mortals below you. Something like that is what comes with rolling a what is it, dog? I'm sorry. uh, you know doing a check like that. So you won't necessarily know what the difficulty class of a particular task is. The more outrageous the task, the higher the difficulty class. And if you request to do something that's completely outrageous based on the rules of the world that it exists in, so let's say that the dungeon world itself is set in some place that has similar physics and rules to Earth, which most do. Most will subscribe to that, but there are different planes of existence that you could potentially be on that might affect that. So let's say we're on Earth and you're carrying, uh, I don't know, you're carrying 2 of your other party members, and there is a 100-foot chasm, and you go, I jump across the chasm. You are probably just going to straight out fail that. The dungeon master is going to look at you and go, are you sure? Usually, if the usually, I say this, very specifically with the usually, if a dungeon master asks you, are you sure? Generally, what you're about to do is an incredibly stupid idea. And the chance of failure is incredibly high, or if on a failure, something extremely negative is going to happen. With that being said, a dungeon master might try to throw you off a little bit by asking you if you're sure to do something, and just kind of nudge you away from that. Like maybe something good is could happen. But usually, if a dungeon master looks at you and goes, are you sure? It means that you probably shouldn't be doing the thing you're trying to do. On the flip side, you won't need to make an ability check for something that is very easy, something that's very easy. So let's say, again, you're not encumbered and you just want to say, I climbed the ladder to the 2nd floor. If the ladder is a normal ladder and you don't have any negative effects on you, you're probably just going to succeed at climbing the ladder to the 2nd floor. So the dungeon master will probably say something like, you climb to the 2nd floor, and then describe what you see on the 2nd floor. But like I was saying before, it's good if player characters can get to the point where they are doing some more of the storytelling, and the dungeon master is more or less filling in the different gaps. That all comes down to role playing. It all depends on the group that you're playing with, or what particular, what scenario you're in, what situation. So the more information that you have as a player character, the more you'll be able to drive the story. If you're in a new environment, you're gonna have to let the dungeon master describe the environment, let them let you know what kind of things are around, and then ask questions. So always asking questions. So if the dungeon master describes an environment, like let's say you walk into a room, the windows are all smashed out, uh you see bodies laying on the ground, tables overturned, there's a few sconces that are barely flickering left with light, and at the far east end you see a door half ajar. You could ask questions at that point. You could say something like, are the windows, are they smashed into the room or out of the room? Because that's different information that you might need to know. And if the you ask something like that, the dungeon master might ask you to make, what might either just tell you, or will ask you to make an ability check. So let's say you ask, is the glass, was it smashed in or smashed out of the room? And the dungeon master asks you to make an investigation, or an investigation check. Then you'll roll your d20, add your intelligence modifier or your investigation modifier. I wish I had a better mouse there, but you'll add this investigation modifier there, which I'll explain why those are separate from that in a second. You'll add that investigation modifier and then check against the difficulty class. Something like that, the dungeon master might just say, you notice that the glass is smashed out of the room instead of into the room. So that could give you different information. So, the glass is smashed out. Whatever happened to this room came from inside the room to outside, not outside to in. So that might lead you to believe that something happened on the inside, that there was a fight and somebody escaped and jumped out. So you might want to look for different clues of what might have happened in that environment. The more information you gather, the better picture you and your fellow player characters can paint about what you should do next, where you should go next. And that is, important. Um, you might find yourself in a group, though, that just wants to be a bunch of murder hobos. That is a Dungeons and Dragons term, and it basically just means you run around killing anything and everything that moves and taking their stuff. So if someone you think might be against you whatsoever, that group of player characters will probably attack them. There are ways of dealing with uh, those type of parties. Usually, it is not pleasant for the uh, player. It's not pleasant for the dungeon master, first of all, to have to deal with that type of group for the most part, because they put time and energy into creating this world. Or if they didn't create the world and they're using a pre-built campaign, they've spent time studying that pre-built campaign, studying the world and trying to figure out exactly what is going on, so that they have a deep knowledge of different things. They understand the NPC's motivations for stuff. They're trying to remember all of this other information. And if you're just going in killing everybody, it, might dissuade some, it takes away from some of the time that the dungeon master put in to all of that work. So if they've thought like, oh, all right, well, this NPC knows this about, such and such a thing. This is what their general plan, their general plan is, and this is the information they know. This is the information that the player characters should end up getting from this NPC, or this is information that the NPC doesn't know that the player characters might be trying to get, and how the NPC is going to interact with the player characters, puts in all that work, and then this particular NPC happens to have a negative, more aggressive personality, and the player characters just come in and kill him just like that. It kind of ruins it. But something as a dungeon master that you have to learn is that you will make plans, and then the player characters will do the complete opposite thing that you thought they were going to do, and all that work is out the window, and now you're working on, more on the fly, more improvisation to try and keep the story going and react to what the player characters do, because the dungeon master is there to guide the story. They give the overall feel and tone of the world and all of that. And at the end of the day, the player characters are going to do something. A decent example of this was I had created a campaign. I created my own mini campaign, and I hadn't like completely finished the entire thing. I knew the general plot line, and I knew about what I needed the player characters to do, but it was more on a session to session basis of what I was preparing. But for the intro session, I was like, all right, this is the backstory of everything that's going on. This is what the hook is going to be. So I'm going to start by saying, to basically explain to the player characters why they are all together wherever they are. And the basic idea of this was that one of the gods of the world there had been a cataclysmic battle between these player characters at a higher level and this god in the future. And that during the course of this battle, that in that reality, the player characters lost. And they lost, and the person who was working for this other god and the god themselves were able to cast all of the player characters back in time. And so when the player characters woke up, it was like, you wake up, you're laying on a field of singed grass, in a field on singed grass, laying down. You have no memory of why you got there and stuff like that. And the intent was that this particular piece of singed grass was singed in such a way that it showed a symbol, that indicated that god that they were fighting, which was going to be kind of like an introduction to that, and I described the fields, that are around them, the, trees and all that stuff, which direction a road is and stuff like that. Like they can see a road and stuff like that, which direction it goes. I was hoping, after describing all of this stuff about the air was crackling and stuff like that with lightning, sounds of electrical discharge, that something had just happened to send them right there, that they would try and investigate that particular area. And the party just goes, all right, well, we're going to go on the road and we're going to head east. It's like, all right, well, all that stuff that I had come up with for explaining the symbol and what the character might know about that particular symbol, that's all out the window, which, again, is totally okay. The player characters are going to be player characters. But let's get back to different things about the player characters. So I mentioned before that these particular skills, so the stuff that you see, acrobatics, animal handling, arcana, athletics, deception, they all have a shortened version of whatever the ability score is over here. So dex for dexterity. So you're going to add your dexterity modifier to an acrobatics check, but you also might be proficient in that particular skill. So that's what these P's mean in here. If you have a paper player sheet, usually you will like fill that in or something like that, but it means you're proficient. And what that means is you'll add your proficiency bonus to it, which is right over here, your proficiency bonus. The proficiency bonus will increase as you level up, and it is tied to your particular level at your particular class. Usually, I'm pretty sure it goes up at like level, so it goes up, I think, at level 3, level 7, or and stuff like that. Let me see if we can't find a player's handbook. Let's see if we can't find a class. Let's just look at the barbarian real quick. So the barbarian, so proficiency bonus. So level 5, it goes up level 9 and 13 and 17. So that's when your proficiency bonus will go up. You'll start with a proficiency bonus of 2, and you'll just add that to whatever skill that you're trying to check if you're proficient in it. So this particular character is proficient in history, so they get their intelligence modifier, which is +1, plus their proficiency bonus, which is +2. So a history check for them will be a total of +3. So when they make a history check, they'll roll their d20, they'll add 3 to it, and then they'll compare that to the difficulty class of the particular check that they're looking at. There are times that you might try to make a check, and the dungeon master will decide that you would have no knowledge of that no matter what. And in that case, you would just fail the check. Like, you would understand, recognize that it is something that you haven't encountered before. Now, the dungeon master might decide to give you a clue as to where you could go to learn that information. But if you've never encountered that before, then you wouldn't know. So let's say that your character happened to be, before they were an adventurer, they were the town drunk. They had never left the town. All they did was they, bummed money off people, went and got drunk, and had no knowledge of adventuring whatsoever. If they tried to make a history check on like a lick or something like that, then they might just fail because their character has no knowledge of that. But that's different things. Usually if you can give a reason why you might know that, you could kind of get away with it. So if you're that bum, that drunk bum who was trying to look in the history of a lick, and I say, that's something that your character doesn't know, or I ask you, well, why would your character have known about them in general? You might say something like, oh, anytime that I was in the bars, I was always talking to adventurers, and so, or I would always get information just from hearsay, and I've heard these different terms before, so I might know, my character might know things from the past. And usually that sort of thing is a check that you as a player don't know about a particular thing, but the character itself might have had prior knowledge of that. So an example of this is I was running a campaign. I was running a campaign, and they were fighting a troll, and someone decided that they wanted to do a check on this troll to see what their character knew about the troll. Having fought trolls before as their player character, or as their character knew that trolls will regenerate health. Each turn they will be regenerating health, and so that's something that the player didn't know because they hadn't metagamed and read the entire monster manual. but it's something that their player or that their character did. So they asked about something and they learned the information through their character, which is more information for the players, which helps drive the story, which helps inform decisions that people are going to make. Um, so that is, I keep getting a little off topic, but that is proficiency. It just basically you add your proficiency bonus to it, and you'll get proficiency from either your class or your race or your background might give you proficiency in stuff. So if your particular player character's background was that you worked in a monastery for, your entire adolescent years, you might have proficiency on history checks or something like that. Um, Other ways you might get proficiency is the dungeon master might just tell you on a particular check that you are proficient. So if you're trying to do something that, um, let's say you are a rather nimble character and you decide that you want to fold an origami plane, or like a paper plane that is going to be like the best paper plane ever that you're going to fold. Well, there's not anything, you know, specific to folding a paper plane. So the dungeon master would probably say something like, all right, make a dexterity check. And they might decide that based on your character's abilities and their background and all that stuff, that they that you are proficient in that. So they'll say, make a dexterity check. You are proficient on this check. So for this character, you'd roll your d20, you'd add 2, and then you'd add another, or from the dexterity modifier, then you'd add another 2 from your proficiency bonus. And that'll dictate how good of a particular thing that you make. So those are skill checks. So abilities are these, those are ability checks. Skill checks are specific things based on those, and you might be proficient or not proficient in that particular thing. Saving throws. Saving throws is basically anything that is going to be, if something detrimental is going to happen, usually you might have to make a saving throw. So if you're being attacked with magic, you might have to make a saving throw. Or if you are falling far distance, you might have to make a saving throw to determine if you take full damage, half, reduced damage, or no damage from a particular thing. Give me 1 second. I gotta close the door real quick. All right. So saving throws. So let's, for instance, say you're being attacked by a wizard, which wizards use intelligence as their intelligence as their primary ability. So you might have to make an intelligence saving throw against that attack, that magic attack that they're doing. So what you would do is you'd again roll your d20, and you'd add your saving throw modifier, which is usually the same as the ability score modifier for the particular one. So a strength saving throw, dexterity saving throw, constitution saving throw. Those match up. But again, you can be proficient in a saving throw, and you would then again add your proficiency bonus to that saving throw. So this particular character is proficient in wisdom and charisma. So if they were making a wisdom or charisma saving throw, they would get to add their proficiency bonus to that. So instead of having 1 or +1 and +1, they have +3 and +3. There's also different things that you might get from your class. So this particular, I believe it's the elf is the thing that determines this particular one, but they have advantage against being charmed, and magic can't put you to sleep. So you can't be magically put to sleep as this character, which are different things. Different races have different things. Different classes have different things regarding that. Moving on, we have initiative. So initiative is how quickly you go in battle. So anytime you're in a combat situation, when the dungeon master tells you to roll for initiative, you're going to be adding your initiative modifier. Again, typically your initiative is whatever your dexterity modifier is. So this is just kind of breaks it out, so it's a little easier for you to see. That way, all right, I need to add my initiative modifier, so +2. So I'm rolling my d20. I get a 14. I have 16. The dungeon master will then order the particular turn order based on everyone's initiative. Highest initiative goes first to lowest initiative. In the event of player character ties, generally the player characters might roll again to see which one of them will go first. Dungeon Master might tell you to choose which one goes first. In the event of a tie between a player character and a non-player character, the Dungeon Master will typically decide which one goes first. I usually lean toward the player character going before the monster or non-player character, just so that they have a little bit of an edge and can get some damage in earlier than other things. Armor class. So armor class is basically your combat damage class, or difficulty class, not damage class. So whenever you're being attacked, someone has to roll higher than your armor class to be able to hit you. So if a monster is attacking you and rolls an 8 and has a modifier of 3, that's going to put them at 11, which is less than the armor class. That attack is going to miss. If the attack equals or exceeds the armor class, it's been a little bit. I think it's equals or exceeds. It might just be exceeds greater than armor class. Damage and healing. Damage class, armor class. Equals or exceeds. Yep. Total equals or exceeds the target's armor class, you will do damage to that particular thing. So because it was in our example, it was an 11, which is less than this character's armor class, that's going to miss. If they had happened to roll with their modifiers a 13 or greater, then it would have hit, and then they would have rolled damage dice. And each particular attack has different damage to it. So if we look here, there's an example of a dagger. So this character gets +4 to hit, so they're probably proficient with that dagger, and they're getting their dexterity modifier, so +2 and +2, so that's where they get that +4 from. Oh, goodness gracious. Why is the dog... Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Ugh. All right, I'm back. Hey, Mitch Mannix. Thanks for joining in. The dog was barking. Had to go deal with that. So, I was just in the middle of explaining damage and attacking. So, we're talking about armor class. So, armor class is what someone's attack roll is going to have to be greater than for a particular attack to hit. So an example I had was a monster rolled an 8. They had a modifier of 3, which gave them a total of 11, which is less than 13, so that particular attack would miss. In the event that there is a third, so if they got 13 or higher, so it has to equal or exceed the armor class, then it would hit, and that's when you would apply damage. So anytime you're rolling, and if there's something that you need me to explain, just let me know. Went through a lot of the ability checks and scores, so stuff on the right hand side already before. So this dagger +4 to hit, so they'd roll their d20, they'd add +4 to it, and if that is greater than the armor class of 13, then they would roll for damage, which is 1d4. So you'd roll a d4 and you'd add 2 to that, and that's how much damage that particular character would, or creature or character would take. So your average here is 2.5. So let's just say it got a 2 plus 2, so they do 4 damage to the monster or character, and they take that amount of hit point damage. Defenses. So defenses are different things that your particular character can have. Usually, it's stuff like resistant to particular type of attack. So you see that this one says piercing, this one says bludgeoning. If you're resistant to that type of attack, then it will do half damage to you. If you are immune to a particular type of attack, it will do no damage. And if you are vulnerable to a particular type of attack, then it would do double damage to that, which is always fun when you can find a monster's vulnerability and hit them for 25 or 30 because you just laid on the hurt. So inspiration. So inspiration goes hand in hand with advantage and disadvantage. So different things will affect whether or not you have advantage or disadvantage on a particular skill check. So again, these things over here, or an attack. So when you're adding that modifier, if you have advantage, you will roll 2 d20s and take the best one. If you have disadvantage, you will roll 2 d20s and take the worst one. And then you'll apply the effects of whatever check it is. So if you're doing a skill check, that determines success or failure. And if you're doing an attack, you'll compare it against armor class. It determines whether you hit or miss the target. Inspiration is something that only the dungeon master can give you. If you generally, you'll get that by doing something either incredibly insane and works out or well thought out. You'll get that. You'll get the dungeon master might give you inspiration, or if you do something that you as a player character wouldn't necessarily have done, but the sorry, you as the player character wouldn't necessarily have done, but your character would have done. If you do that, and even if it's detrimental to your party, you might get inspiration because of you role playing more than actually metagaming. So let's say, let me see what the flaws for this particular example is. So a flaw. So I feel no compassion for the dead. They're the lucky ones. So that's a flaw that this particular character has. Something like that could mean if you're in a town and people are at a funeral and they're mourning somebody, and your particular character feels no compassion for the dead, they might accidentally say something rude to some of the townspeople, which would then turn the townspeople against you, not want to help you, or be, generally more hostile to, um, to you and potentially your other fellow player characters. So that is something that's not beneficial for the party, but it is something that is definitely something your character would have done. You might get inspiration for that. So yes, the party got penalized because of your character's background and their position on that. Um, but you yourself, the character, got inspiration, and so inspiration can be spent to basically give yourself advantage on an ability check. So you can only get it from the dungeon master, and you can only have one inspiration at a time. You can't be double inspired. So if you're making a check, like let's say this is the critical moment, and you really need to hit this particular monster, or you need to make this check work. Like let's say you're trying to throw a rope across a ravine because you're trying to outrun a rhino or something like that, and you got to get the party out of there. You might want to use that inspiration to give yourself advantage on whatever that check is. So in the rope throwing situation, that might be dexterity. So you'd be adding your dexterity modifier over here, and you're like, I'm going to use my inspiration. You would then have advantage. You'd roll twice, take the best outcome. It just gives you a little bit of an edge to try and get a better outcome to a particular roll. Is what inspiration. I already talked about proficiency bonus. That's basically just something that you add on top of what what your modifier is, if you happen to be proficient in that, and that's something that comes from your character class or your background, something like that. Speed. So this is mostly used in combat. That determines how far you can move on a turn. So when you're in combat, you can do a move action up to your speed, and then you can do one other action. There are things that'll get you additional actions on that, but usually it's one move, one action. And we'll talk about combat later. So what this means is that your character can move 35 feet. When it comes to feet, usually you're looking at a grid, and each grid mark refers to. Sorry, the dog wants into the room. Each grid mark refers to 5 feet. Come on. So give me a second. I'm just going to sign in real quick. If I can remember my password. Come on, remember that password. There we go. All right. Let's just pull that up. So here's an example of a grid that happens to be. So each of these spaces is 5 feet. So the general idea is that a normal sized character can takes up 5 feet of combat space. That's just because you're holding your weapons and you're just generally taking up space. Larger characters, so like this particular one, takes up more space. So this is a large monster that takes up 20 feet of space, so all those 4 squares. Marketplace purchases. So usually you're looking at just taking up 1 square. That's 5 feet of space. So if this character had 30 feet of movement, it could move 7 spaces. It could go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. So it can move all the way over there if it wanted to. anytime that you want to move diagonally on a square grid like this, it's going to, every second diagonal is going to cost you double movement. So to get here is 5. To get here would be an additional 10. So that's a total of 15 feet. So it's because you're moving diagonally, you don't have to do like, 5, 10, 15, 20. Saves a little bit of movement, but it is a little bit disadvantageous to move diagonally on a square grid. If we were using a hexagon grid, it'd be a little bit better than that. So that's speed. And again, we'll talk about actions that you can take in a bit. So health points. So you get health points based on your hit dice and your level. So as you, at first level, you will start with the maximum you get plus your Constitution modifier. So the hit dice for this particular character is 8. And so they started with 9 hit points because they had their Constitution modifier added to the maximum value of the die. Each level after that, you will roll a whatever your hit dice value is. So this is a D8, and you would add your Constitution modifier. So if I rolled a 4, I'd have 5. I would add 5 on top of my 9 before. My total hit points now are 14 for my maximum hit points. Current hit points are exactly what they sound like. That is what you currently have as hit points. So if I have 16, I take 10 damage. I have 6 current hit points. Temporary hit points. There are a couple ways to get temporary hit points. Usually it's by either casting a spell or on yourself or wearing a particular article of clothing. That might give you temporary hit points. Those are basically additional hit points that you will use before you get into your current hit points. So if my current hit points are 16, I could still have temporary hit points of 3. And then if I take 7 damage, these 3 temporary hit points would go away, and I would take 4 damage there, and I'd be at 12 current hit points. The other purpose for hit dice, sorry, dog. All right. The other purpose for hit dice is when you rest, you can regain health. So after a short rest, you can roll a hit die to regain that amount of health, and then you'd have spent that hit die, and you get the rest of them back once you do a long rest. So a short rest is, I believe, defined as a certain amount of time with no activity. Where are we? Go back to the top. Hold away. So I think that's something like 4 hours with no activity, and a long rest is at least 1 hour. At least 1 hour long. There we go. Of doing nothing other than eating, drinking, reading, basically just sitting around. You can spend your hit dice to regain health. A long rest is 8 hours of stuff doing no more than 2 hours of light activity. So usually a long rest is going to be you're sleeping. So you guys are camped out, and each person's taking turn on watch, and they're just sleeping. So each person takes 2 hours standing at watch. Everyone long rests, and then they are going to regain their hit points, all their spent hit dice, or not all of them, but half the total number of them. So if I have 2, I would recover 1. If I have 4, I would recover 2, up to the maximum that I can have for that particular thing. You can't rest more than once in a 24-hour period to gain the benefit. I mean, you can do it, but you can't gain the benefit. Now we get into the fun thing. So death saving throws. So if you drop down to 0 hit points or less, you are dying and your life is in the hands of fate. So you don't add any modifiers when you make death saving throws. It is literally a 50-50 shot whether or not you're going to save on a particular thing. So when it comes to your turn in combat, instead of taking an action or something like that, you will make a death saving throw. If it is greater than 10, so 11 to 20, you will succeed. If it is 10 or less, you will fail. 3 successes, and you're stabilized, which means you're no longer dying. You're not conscious. You're just unconscious laying there and you're stabilized. 3 fails and your character dies. There is no coming back from death. Actually, I say that. And then there's revive and like resurrect and other different spells that can be cast. But typically, you do not want to die. It is generally a bad thing. Um, in some groups, dying is punished by taking your character sheet and destroying it completely. Others is just, all right, well, you can remake a character based on your character if you want to, or you can change it up to a different one. I'm of the yeah, I'm of the group that if your character dies, that is gone. Like that, it's completely destroyed, um, and you have to come up with something new. Obviously, if somebody in your group or has the ability to resurrect a character, we wouldn't destroy the character sheet right away. We would wait till it's a little more permanent. But yes, I'm of that camp that your character dies, you did bad things, you need to be punished. Your poor character is gone. You've got to start over. Um, Proficiencies. So this is stuff that comes from your uh, class or background or race, and that tells you what you can add your proficiency bonus to or what particular armors you can wear. So for armor here, this particular character is proficient in heavy, light, medium armor, and shields. So basically, all armor, which just means that they can cast magic while wearing that armor. If you're not proficient in a particular armor, you can't cast magic while wearing it because you're too distracted by how uncomfortable the armor is, how it's not fitting you right, the belts are loose and they're not tightened, and you just can't focus enough to cast any spells. Weapons. So that's the type of weapons that you will add your proficiency bonus to. So, for instance, here we've got this dagger. The dagger is a simple weapon, and since it's proficient in simple weapons, it's going to add that dexterity modifier of +2 plus that proficiency bonus of +2 for a total of +4 to hit on that. And then languages that you're proficient in. So, common is just the general one in our, Earth. The equivalent would basically be English would be considered the common language, just because it's for the most part um, the either a primary or secondary language of a nation. And then there's other things that you can understand. So this particular character can understand Draconic and Elvish as well. So if they come across a character that only speaks Elvish and nobody in your party can speak Elvish, you're not going to be able to understand that character at all. And you'll have to try and figure out some other way to communicate with them other than speech. Generally, if there's a conversation while everything is happening and everyone can hear what's going on as the players, if your particular character either isn't in the room when it's going on or doesn't speak the language to be able to understand that, as a player, you have to tell yourself, I should not act on this information because my character doesn't know this. It's good for your character, or it's good for you as a player and the dungeon master if your character acts based on the knowledge that the character has, not the knowledge that the player has. Metagaming in some situations is fine, but generally acting as a character who only knows the information that's been presented to them directly in the context of the scenario, it just makes for a better experience, in my opinion, than metagaming. There's a time and a place for metagaming, and at my Dungeons and Dragons table, that is not the time or the place. Um, so actions in combat. So attack. So briefly talked about attack. What you're just going to do is you're going to use one of your weapons that you're currently wielding. So as we see right here, this particular character is holding a dagger and has nothing in their other hand. So they have a dagger that they can attack with, and they have a fist that they can attack with. So you'll make an attack. You'll say, I'm attacking this particular character or this particular monster, and you'll make an attack roll on that. Most of your attacks are going to be melee attacks, which means you need to be within 5 feet. So this drow character here is can attack anything that's touching next to it like this. So this dwarf is currently in range. Now it would be considered out of range. That would be 10 feet away. So this large monster, any of these squares on the exterior are considered adjacent to it for melee attack purposes. And you can make a melee attack against that particular character or particular monster from any of those squares. If you have a ranged attack, it will generally tell you. Actually, I wonder. I don't think does this character have a ranged weapon. I don't think it does. Crowbar, druidic focus, leather. Well, we'll just give him something then. We will give him a weapon, and we are gonna go ahead and give him a. Just give him a hand crossbow. Cool. And we're gonna go ahead and equip that. Sweet. So it tells you what your range is. So actually, the dagger technically has a range as well because you can throw it. But so the range is 30/120. What that means is that you can hit anything within 30 feet or 120 feet with disadvantage. So if the monster is within 30 feet, you don't have disadvantage on it. Anything greater than that, you'll have disadvantage when you're making that attack action, which, as previously described, is that you'll roll 2d20s and take the worst option. Certain things, like the crossbow, require you to have ammunition. So you have to have crossbow bolts to be able to use your crossbow. Otherwise, it is not going to work. You're just going to be dry firing, which is not good for a crossbow, from what I've heard. And it has other different types on it. So this particular one has the loading weapon type, which means that you must take an action to load the weapon. Most regular bows, you can just fire every turn. You grab an arrow, you pull back. But for the crossbows, generally you have to load the crossbow. So you'll fire. Your next turn, you'll take an action to load the crossbow, and then you can fire again with that. Damage types again. So there's piercing, bludgeoning, poison, arcana. There's a bunch of different damage types, which let's see if we can find damage types. Damage and healing. Damage types. So yeah, so acid, bludgeoning, cold, fire, force, lightning, necrotic. So like decaying material and stuff like that. Piercing, poison, psychic, radiant. All the different stuff. Slashing. Those are different types, which usually don't matter except when you're talking about your vulnerabilities and your resistances and your immunities. But each different weapon has a particular damage type. So other things with this, so this dagger is a simple weapon, which again is why this particular character is proficient with it. Finesse just means that you can either you can use two of them essentially, or you can use dexterity. That one's dexterity. You can use your dexterity modifier instead of your strength modifier when making an attack with that. It's up to you. If your strength modifier is higher than your dexterity, do the strength modifier. If your dexterity is higher, pick the strength or dexterity modifier. That's all that finesse means, is you get to pick and choose, because usually it's strength for handheld weapons. Light, I can't remember exactly what light does, but I'm pretty sure it just means that you can hold, you can dual wield them. Light weapons. Weapons. Go back to the top. Where are we at? Weapons. Player's Handbook. Weapons. Shield, heavy armor, half plate, weapons, weapon properties. There we go. So ammunition. We'll just go through these this way. Ammunition is, like I said, you have to have ammunition to make it work. Your bow, you have to have arrows. Your crossbow, you have to have crossbow bolts. Slingshot, if you got a slingshot, you're going to have something to put in that slingshot to throw. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to use the slingshot. Just different things. At the end of the battle, usually you can recover half of your ammunition just by searching it. So you're pulling your arrows out of, dead bodies. Half of them broke and are unusable. Or you're picking up rocks from your slingshot that you were using. So finesse. So you can choose between strength or dexterity when you're making your attack and damage rolls. You have to use the modifier for both rolls. Again, usually you're just going to pick whichever one's better. If you're doing that. Heavy. So small and tiny creatures have disadvantage on attack rolls with heavy weapons. So it just means it's bigger than you are. And you're lugging around this giant 6-foot greatsword and you're a 4-foot tall halfling that's trying to wield this in battle. You're going to have disadvantage with that. Light is easy to handle, and you can, again, use it for when you're using two weapons, which is a specific thing for specific characters. Loading, again, takes time. It takes time to reload. Range means that it has a range. So you want to be further than 5 feet away from them, but within the designated range. So as we saw with that crossbow, that's 30 feet or 120 feet with disadvantage. Reach means you can hit things that are greater than 5 feet away from you, up to 10 feet away from you. So if you have a long spear, I believe the spear has the reach one, so you can attack someone 10 feet away instead of 5 feet away. There are special things that have special properties to them, which you go over on a weapon by weapon basis. Thrown means it's generally a melee weapon, but you could choose to throw the weapon if you wanted to. So that dagger has the thrown property. I could be sitting here stabby with it, or if someone's further away, like on a second floor or something like that above me, and I can't get to them, I might throw my dagger at them and try and hurt them that way. You got to be careful with your thrown weapons, though, because you could damage them by throwing them or lose them, which is never a good time. So you always want to try and make sure that you'll be able to recover your weapon if you're going to need it. So if we're on a boat and we're being attacked by a Leviathan or something like that, and I throw my spear at the Leviathan, it hits it, it sticks into the Leviathan goes, I don't want to deal with these people. I'm going to swim away. I have just lost my spear. It got rid of the Leviathan, which is good, but I do no longer have my spear. Two-handed, very simple. It just means you have to use two hands when you're attacking. That's very simple. You can't hold two different weapons at a time. You can't have a shield and the weapon. You have to use both hands. So versatile can be used with one or two hands. Generally, it'll show you a specific damage value for when you're using two hands. So when you're using one hand, you use the base attack. When you're using two hands, you're going to do more damage with that because you can get more force behind it, that particular attack. So cast a spell. So this is for all the magic users out there. So your clerics, your bards, your wizards, your druids, anyone that uses magic. I think most of them most classes can eventually get access to a spell, but there are a few like the warrior and the barbarian, I believe, who don't ever get access to spell casting. So when you're casting a spell, it's going to take time. So a good number of spells take one action, so you just cast it on your turn. Some of them can take time, so up to a minute or an hour to cast, depending on what the particular spell is. And each spell has different requirements as well, which really you'd have to go over on a spell by spell basis. But basically, it just means that you're going to use one of your spells, expend a spell slot, and cast that particular spell. and we'll go over spell slots and all that when we talk about magic using. Dash. Dash just means that I can move twice my normal distance. So this particular character has 35 feet that it can move. I can choose to dash and move up to 70 feet, which is pretty good. Sorry, I had to drink there. So if you need to get out of there and get out of there quick, taking a dash action is usually pretty good. So disengage. Disengage is specific to preventing an opportunity attack. So an opportunity attack happens whenever an enemy creature moves out of your range. So you can use um, react a reaction to take an opportunity attack against that particular monster, and you just get a free attack on them as they're moving out. So if we look at our situation here, this dwarf is next to our drow. The dwarf wants to move away. The second the dwarf moves away, that can triggers the potential for this drow to do an opportunity attack against that dwarf. You only get one reaction per round, so between your turns you only get one, so you can't do an opportunity attack against the dwarf and then an opportunity attack against this creature. You can only do once. So if you think more than one creature is going to move out of your range, you might want to not do an opportunity attack against this particular thing to be able to against to be able to against another one. What disengage does though is it prevents your enemy from having the ability to do an opportunity attack against you. So you did something during that flurry that prevented them from striking at you as you went away. So like maybe you pushed their blade away with yours and it allowed you to step out of the way or some other thing. The dodge action, I actually have to look that one up because I don't use it all that often. It's not actions in combat. Dodge. So, yep, you focus on avoiding attacks. So you have all attack rolls against you have disadvantage if you can see the attacker. So if someone's next to me, I choose the dodge action. Anytime that people try to attack me that I can see, I can try and step out of the way of their thing. They'll have disadvantage. It'll be less of a chance that they'll hit me. Might still happen, but it is a possibility. So help. So if one of your allies is trying to do something, you take the help action and you can give them the ability to have advantage on their check for that. So if someone's trying to break down a door in the middle of combat, you can try and help them break down the door. The next time that they get to their turn, they'll have advantage trying to break that door down. So there's alternatives. So if they're attacking someone, you can try and help someone attack, and then they'll have advantage against their next attack action on that particular creature. Hide. So taking the hide action is you can try to hide from your enemies. So if you're in cover, some sort of cover, you can roll a stealth check to try and hide, and then you can potentially get some extra damage from people by being unseen from them. They won't target you because they can't see you. They might know you're in the general area, so they might try and find you, but you're just looking at trying to be able to turn the tide by sneaking around, getting better vantage point on somebody else by hiding from them. So ready action. The ready action is a very niche action. You have to basically say that you are going to wait for something to happen between your turn that you are then going to act on. So you have to have what's going to trigger your action and what your action is going to be. So their example here says that their ready is if the cultist steps on the trap door, I'll pull the lever that opens it. So generally, you're standing near the lever. You see that the creature might be stepping on the trap door soon, and you're going to want to pull the lever for that trap door. When it comes to that cultist turn, that cultist moves onto the trap door. its turn is interrupted so that you can pull the lever and resolve that particular action. Once that happens, then the cultist will, if able, finish their turn. If not able, then their turn will end. So, same thing here. Another example: if the goblin steps next to me, I move away, which basically just means that I want to be where I'm at right now, but if I'm going to be threatened by this particular creature, I'm going to step out of the way. So you can also ready spells, and so it can be waiting for a particular thing to then be cast, not on your turn. Holding spells requires concentration. Concentration just means that you have to be thinking about it. If you get damaged, shoved, moved, something that's going to break your concentration, then you can no longer have that spell readied. But otherwise, you'll be able to cast it as you could cast it as a readied spell or later. Some of them require you to ready your spells. Search. So you're focusing on trying to find something. So depending on what you're trying to find, you'll determine between wisdom or intelligence. So your perception or investigation. And you could just be looking for if there's a secret button or something like that. Like, we need to get out of this room. Let's see if we can find a key or something to break the lock. You can search for that as one of your actions. Using an object, so interacting with an object. So if there's a door there, you could open the door. So interacting with an object. So if you're trying to pick up like a vase or move something or throw a chair out of the way, flip the table over, stuff like that. Use an item that you have. That's all under that use an object idea. And you can always improvise. You could always come up with something ridiculous that you want to try and do, which is oh so much fun. I had a particular player character once. They grappled this other creature and they tackled him to the ground basically. So they're laying on top of him. They have him restrained, and they said, "I want to suffocate them with kisses." And so they were basically doing, a couple of rounds of checks back and forth where that player character was basically holding the other non-player character's nose closed and kissing them at the same time so they couldn't breathe. And after a couple of rounds, they succeeded multiple times in the contest check against them and successfully made the other creature pass out by just laying on top of them and making out with them. It was absolutely hysterical. We were all dying because there's other people that are fighting skeletons and stuff like that. And then over in the corner, there's just this one character laying on top of this guard, making out with them, making sure they can't breathe. And they were able to successfully capture them and interrogate them. And it was wild. It was absolutely wild. So that's sort of the fun things that you can do. And one of the reasons I really like Dungeons and Dragons, because you can come up with the most ridiculous stuff possible. And as long as it is physically possible based on the rules of the world that everything is taking place in, generally your dungeon master will allow it and allow you to try doing it. And you can get some absolutely just hysterical situations that you are going to end in. So there are special actions that characters can have. That's again comes from your race or your class or stuff like that. This particular character has channel divinity. You channel divine energy to fuel magical effects a number of times per short rest. So this one is once per short rest. And that particular skill, I think, just gives it boosts a magical effects and maybe extra damage or something like that. Different senses that your character has. So usually this is for stuff that your character you don't have to say I'm doing this particular thing. That your passive perception or passive insight will just make it happen. So if you guys are traveling on a road and some creatures are trying to sneak up behind you and their stealth isn't as high as your passive perception, the dungeon master will probably say this particular character notices, these creatures sneaking up behind them. But that is also affected by marching order, which is how people are standing. So are you in a single file line? If so, who's in front, who's in the back? Are you two abreast? Same thing, who's in front, who's in back? That'll determine who can find traps. So if you're in the front, you're potentially looking for traps that you can find. If you're in the back, you're generally just keeping an eye out for people trying to sneak up behind you. But that's what those passive things are. You don't have to particularly do it, it just happens based on the particular scenario. If there's a hidden door, you might just find it by just walking in, and the dungeon master goes, you notice that there are scratches on the floor indicating that there is a hidden door right there because your passive perception is high enough for that. And then you also have your passive intelligence. It's just different things that when you walk into a room or in a situation, you just gain the benefit of being that knowledgeable and being smarticles. Um, Other different things that you can have. This particular one, because they're an elf, has dark vision, which means that up to 60 feet they see in dim lighting as though it's bright light, and in darkness as though it's dim lighting. So it just means that they can see in the dark for the most part. If it's dark, then they only see shapes. They don't see colors and stuff like that. They just kind of see shapes and shadows, but they can still see, whereas other characters won't be able to see that sort of stuff. Uh, this is just a huge list of different things that talk about this particular class. So this is a cleric. This is just information directly out of the player's handbook, and that is mostly for the player character. That's for you to know what your character can do, and also so that the dungeon master doesn't have to remember for all of the player characters and all the NPCs and all the monsters what everyone can do. That they only have to worry about the non-player characters and the monsters. The player character, it is your job to know what your character can and cannot do. And generally making sure that you don't try and pull one over on the dungeon master. One, it's not nice, it's very rude. And two, if they find out that you did it, you will probably be punished quite severely, because the dungeon master holds all the power, which is so much fun for people that enjoy power. But so you do usually if you're using a particular skill that your class or race has, then you're going to say what you're doing and why you're doing it. Your dungeon master will probably have a copy of your character sheet, and they'll be able to know what you can and can't do. But again, they'll have to be checking. The way that I tend to run is whoever's turn it is, I have their character sheet pulled up so that I can see it and glance over and make sure that they're not doing something they're not supposed to do, or that if they need help with something or they're not understanding something, I can help explain it to them better by that particular thing. So there's more information about that channel divinity that this particular class has, which is just more information. Money. So copper pieces, silver pieces, Illyrium pieces, gold pieces, and platinum pieces. This character's broke. So broke. No money. And the player's handbook and dungeon master's guide does specify what the exchange rate is between them. Sometimes when I'm running a campaign, just to make things easier for myself, I'll just use regular currency, so that like a copper piece is $1, a silver piece is $5, Illyrium $10, gold 20, and platinum 50. It just makes things easier, so that a platinum piece is worth 50 copper pieces. Um, for that exchange rate. Other times I'll do it differently. Depending on your campaign, weight will matter. How strong you are and how much weight you're carrying can make a difference. If you're playing and you're just using paper character sheets, generally it's harder to manage weight that way. And the dungeon master will just kind of keep a general sense of how much stuff you're carrying. It might just be like, no, you can't pick up any more. You're carrying too much. Like if there's a battlefield and you go, all right, I want to take everyone's armor. The dungeon master is going to be like, all right, you're carrying 70 sets of armor. It's crushing your bones and you can't move. That's because it's logical. You can't carry that much stuff. Nobody can carry that much stuff. You're going to have to figure out some other way to do it. If you're using an online thing, so either with D&D Beyond or Roll20 are the two sources that I primarily use. They can help track weight for you, and so they'll be able to tell you if you're encumbered or not. Once you're encumbered, your speed is halved, and you can't take the dash action. I think is with encumbrance as well, but mostly it's just that you can't move as well. You also, I think, might have disadvantage on particular checks. Then there is your equipment. So this is all the stuff you're carrying. Different things have different abilities. So this leather is referring to the leather armor that they're wearing. Have a dagger, have a backpack, a bedroll, carrying a chest, mess kit, ration. So 9 days worth of rations. So if we're sitting out in the wilderness, we have 9 days before we're going to start starving. At least this particular character. How much rope you have. He's got a hammer. So different things that you can use. If you wanted to say something like, I want to, for this particular character, they need to have the hammer if they want to hammer a nail into the wall. If they don't, they got to figure out something else to do with that. What are you going to use? Oh, I'm going to pick up this rock right here and try and hammer that in. It has different outcomes that might happen based on the different things. Manacles, so you can lock somebody up. Basically, you have to have something to be able to use it. Pretty self-explanatory. Torches, so torches will provide light in a particular area. If you don't have torches, it's going to be dark in some places, and that's not going to be good for you because there are some creatures that love the dark and will sit on top of the ceiling and wait for you to pass under them and then drop down on top of you and attack you and be all ridiculous and crazy. And as a dungeon master, it is always fun whenever the player characters don't realize what's going on and they walk right past something like that because it makes for more interesting situations. It is also nice when player characters are diligent and they find out some stuff and that changes their tactic. So the amount of information that the player characters know and stuff that's withheld from them all changes the tactics that they will use in a particular situation. Moving on with more of the character sheet. So this is all stuff about your character and their basically where they come from. So how they look, that might affect different things. So if your particular character, let's say that they have silver hair, that might be the sign of divinity to a particular group of recluses. So you walk in and they're like, oh my goodness. It's like when C-3PO is seen by the Ewoks in Star Wars, that sort of thing. Like, this is a god. I'm going to follow them wholeheartedly because that is what our religion says. So your height, your age, your weight, your faith, your gender, all that stuff, it is partially superficial, but it does matter. Good player characters will be able to leverage different things about their appearance in situations, and a good dungeon master will take player characters' appearances into mind whenever situations are happening. Like, for instance, there is a character class called the Tiefling, which is basically a half demon. Most of the time, people are going to look down on that half demon and be weary of it until they get to know them. So if you're a half demon, expect most of the NPCs to be like, I don't trust you. I don't want you around me. I don't want you around my village. Please go away. Um, they probably won't say it that nicely. They'll probably be a little bit more aggressive and talk about how you're cursed and your demon spawn needs to go back to your master and stuff like that. But that it depends on the NPC and how the dungeon master is feeling with that particular character's reaction. Uh, so character appearance, all that stuff kind of goes in there as well. Allies and organizations. So you might be a part of the Thieves Guild, or you might be friends with a particular baron in a particular city. That stuff gives your particular character extra benefits or hindrances in different situations. If you're friends with the baron in a city, you might be able to get away with petty crimes where some other player character in your party won't. So think of it like Skyrim, where you're a part of the Thieves Guild, and the guard sees you and says, "Hey, don't no stealing." Then you go, "Hey, I'm part of the Thieves Guild. Why don't you look the other way?" And they go, "Okay, that's fine." It's that sort of thing. Um, Many different organizations. You could be part of, a masonry guild or other different things. You could be part of a cult. Basically, whatever is available in the world that the dungeon master is utilizing is available to you become a part of and be able to utilize. So, other things that uh, your character has is they will always have personality traits. Typically, they have two personality traits. They'll have an ideal, a bond, and a flaw. And those are basically just kind of guides for you as a player when you're role playing that character. So your personality traits, your ideals, your bonds, and your flaws will dictate to a certain degree how you should respond in a particular situation. So this personality trait, I live for the thrill of the hunt. If there's something that seems like there's a quarry or like some sort of prey, they might your character might want to chase down whatever it is, even if it's not necessarily beneficial to the party. They might want to chase it down. Like there's a fleeing pack of orcs. Like, oh, I want to chase them down. I want to follow them. I want to, track after them, jump them, destroy them, that sort of thing. Uh, an ideal is similar to that. It's kind of what you hold, kind of what you hold in your mind. It's a more of a driving force behind it. This particular character says, I'll stop the spirits that haunt me or die trying. So something happened in the past for this character that caused them to be haunted by spirits, whether it's because their entire family was slaughtered in front of them and now they're haunted by the ghosts of their family, or maybe they were part of a group that was ordered to go in and slaughter an entire village, and now they're they every time they close their eyes they just see all those villagers crying out to them and they want to get rid of them. Or maybe they're just pestered by ghosts in general, or a poltergeist that's after them, that's just bothering them for the heck of it because they just want to. And so they'll be looking for different things to try and stop that. And a good dungeon master will look at that ideal that you have and will add in uh, different side storylines that will cater to each of the different characters. So maybe an NPC will notice that this character is tormented by different things and will have a suggestion for a way to get rid of them. It might be a valid suggestion, it might not, because it depends on what the NPC knows. But that might be a driving force to be like, you as a player will go, all right, my character wants to go look into this. So you're trying to convince the rest of the party we should go do this. because we need to, because I need to get this out of the way. I need to finish and get rid of all this stuff that's haunting me. And you might be able to. That might be something that is permitted in the world. You might be able to stop the spirits haunting you, but it's also possible that you will never be rid of them, and you're always chasing, like, it's, a fool's errand. You're always chasing after the next thing until your dying day, which is the or die trying there. So bonds is usually something that will restrict your behavior um, in such a way. This particular one says, I have a child to protect. I must make the world a safer place for him or her, which basically means that non-player characters or other player characters could use your child as leverage against you. They could try and say something like, what about that child of yours over in uh, Valhalla, you know, and then that might inform your character's thing. So let's say you walk into uh, king's courtroom and you're trying to basically intimidate the king or threaten the king, and the king just insinuates that they have knowledge about that child and that they might harm that child if you you know don't stop. The other player characters might not care, and your character is going to want to diffuse that situation in such a way. So again, it could be beneficial for your character, not necessarily beneficial for the party. And then the one everyone hates to come up with, but everyone needs to have and is always good when people actually follow them, is the flaws. So flaws is stuff that is almost inherently detrimental to your character or the party. This one, it says, I feel no compassion for the dead. They're the lucky ones. When I was talking about inspiration before, I gave the example that you might walk into a funeral and say something that the other people at the funeral determine is rude or, just otherwise not right. And you could alienate that group of people because of your cold heartedness. And so, again, not necessarily good for the party, not even necessarily good for you, but as your character, that's the way your character would act. And so that's the way you have the character act. It makes for a better storytelling experience in the long run because things just aren't always, working out exactly for the character. Now you need to work past that. You've alienated all these people. How are you guys going to make that right? Do you need to make that right? Or do you need to just let that pass, move on, and just ignore that group of people, that town? Backstory. Backstory comes in along with all of the rest of this. The more detailed your backstory is, generally will help inform later decisions that you make. When I talk about backstory with people, I try to have them basically think of simple questions that they'll want to answer that'll help kind of guide that. Usually it's stuff like, are, wealthy or not wealthy did you come from? Are you educated in such a way? Are your parents both alive, or either of them dead, or are both of them dead? If they're dead, how did they die? Why did they die? Different things that you want to think about for that. Do you know, like, do you have any particular friends? Why did you become an adventurer in the first place? What was the driving force behind it? I had a particular character who was an elf, that the backstory for that elf was there was a time when there between men and elves that there was peace and harmony, and they had an alliance and a pact, and that they would help each other. And my particular character was the princess of the that elven kingdom. And there came a time when the sorry, not the princess, was just a regular person who was in love with the prince there. And the human characters actually accidentally antagonized a dragon, and so they called for aid from the uh, from the elves. The Elven King decided he didn't want to help them because they had antagonized it. They brought this upon themselves. It wasn't something that just came upon them. And so the Elven King refused. My character convinced the prince that we're going to go and talk, help them, even though the other people aren't. And in the battle, all of the human characters fled and and the lover died as a result of the dragon. So the dragon was wounded. The dragon, was a white dragon with only one eye, and it killed, my lover. And then when the player character, or when the character went back to the Elven Kingdom, they were exiled because the king decided, because the king's son was dead because of my actions, more or less. So exiled from elves. So don't like elves because of that, because they didn't honor their pact and they exiled me. Don't like humans because they basically abandoned us and it's their fault that the lover is dead, and want revenge on this particular dragon that killed my lover. Those were different things. So that kind of informed how I reacted in situations. I don't trust humans. I don't trust elves anymore. Even though I'm an elf myself, I don't trust either of them. And I want to get this particular. Why is that? Why I want. There we go. Okay. I was so confused as to why that was. There we go. That's better. All right. Um, yeah, and so I want to get revenge on this white dragon. I want, avenge my lover. That sort of stuff. Doesn't have to be that detailed when you come up with a backstory. It can be something simple, like I was the blacksmith's son in a small village, so I, have decent knowledge working with tools or something like that. And I went off adventuring because I needed to make money for my family and I just needed to send money back. So then you would be looking for things that's going to generate income for your character. So you're not necessarily going to want to take just adventuring for the sake of adventuring. You're going to want to make sure that people that are asking you to do stuff are going to be able to pay you so that you can send money back to your family so you can support them. So it can be detailed, it can be simple. Again, it all depends on how you, as a particular player character, or a particular player, feel about your role playing experience. Spells. There is so much to go over with spells in general because each spellcasting class, so spellcasting class cleric, has different spells that they can cast. Each spellcasting class has different, uh, slightly different rules for their spellcasting, and they each have different abilities and stuff like that with that. So for the cleric, their spellcasting ability is wisdom. So they're going to add their wisdom modifier plus their wisdom or plus their proficiency bonus when they're making spell attacks, and it's all going to be with wisdom. So anytime someone's making a spell save, they're going to use their wisdom, do a wisdom saving throw. So spell save DC is 11. Whoever is defending against it has to get an 11 on a wisdom or greater on a wisdom saving throw. So the general way that spells works is um, there are basically two different types of spells. You have cantrips and you have your first through ninth level spells. A cantrip is something that your character just knows. That is something that they don't necessarily have to, they don't have to use a spell slot for, which I'll talk about in a second. And they don't have to worry about having it prepared or something like that. They know that spell. They've done it a million times. They can just do it. So this particular character has the cantrips light, resistance, and spare the dying. So light, I believe, is you touch an object and it emanates light in a 20-foot sphere for 1 hour. you can just do that. Not going to cost him a spell slot. That's just an action. He goes, I touch this. I touch this table. Now we have a glowing table, which is pretty cool. I think you can also choose the color of light that it emanates as well with that spell. But again, that's something that you as the player character would need to look into when you're deciding on the spells you want if you're using a spellcasting class. Resistance is you touch another character, and for up to 1 minute, I believe they have resistance from a particular damage type that you say. So you can touch someone and make them resistant to fire or cold or anything like that. And Spare the Dying, can't remember exactly what that is, but I'm pretty sure it just prevents somebody from having to make saving throws. It just makes them automatically succeed their saving throws, and they are now at 1 hit point and laying there unconscious. So those are cantrips. They don't cost spell slots. Each different spellcasting class has different cantrips that they can have. You only get a limited number of cantrips that you can have based on your level, which is all down to character creation, which we'll talk about later once we're done with the general rules. So spell slots. So each spell level, you have a certain number of spell slots. So for this particular character, they have 3 spell slots of first level, which means that between a long rest, short rest, between a rest of some kind, they can cast 3 spells that are not cantrips. And this particular class as well, these are the spells they know, but they need to spend time preparing their spells so that they can use that particular one in combat. So while he knows all of these, he might only be able to focus on 4 of them at a time. So after a long rest, the player will go through and go, all right, these are the spells I currently have prepared. And then when you're in combat, you can't change that until you take another long rest for that. And so you won't be able to, let's say you prepared command and create or destroy water, you wouldn't be able to inflict wounds or use healing word until you re-prepared your spells and picked different ones. So there are some classes that prepare spells. There are some classes that once you pick a spell, that is the spell you have. Usually when you level up, you can decide to change out your spells then, but that's really the only time if you don't have prepared spells, but you have known spells instead. Any questions that anybody has regarding? Oh, I did forget one thing. So, excuse me, your alignment. So there are 3 types of, I guess, ethical alignments and 3 types of predictability alignments is the way that I'm going to refer to them. And you get a combination of those 2. So the predictability is lawful, neutral, and chaotic. And the moral is good, neutral, and evil. And so you get a combination of those. So you can be lawful good, lawful neutral, lawful evil, stuff like that. That is another thing that helps inform you as a player how your particular character will act. So if you're a good character, generally you're going to act in the best interest of, the general population. You have, basically decent morals. Where that makes things different is there's lawful good, neutral good, chaotic good. So if you are lawful good, you have basically a set of rules that you follow in pursuit of, doing good for the people as a whole. So, for instance, a lawful good person might be like, we need to stop crime, but we need to do it in such a way that people have a fair trial or something like that. Whereas a chaotic good person might try to do whatever means, use whatever means necessary to achieve that greater goal of the good. So if there's particular crime, they, you know, and they know who's committing it, they might decide to just poison that person and get them out of there. Got it good. Or, you know, do something that is not necessarily the uh the right means to an end. The chaotic good is kind of more the ends justify the means, whereas lawful good is you have to get to the end by the right means, is a kind of a way to describe that. Neutral just means that you don't have one tendency to either direction, so that works for between the lawful and chaotic. If you're neutral good, then you're just good. You're just looking out for people. You don't have a strict set of rules. You're not going to do crazy stuff. You're just whatever. You're just good, a generally good person. Man, I haven't talked for that long in a while. So evil. Evil means that basically you're in it for yourself. Pretty self-explanatory. If you're so you can be lawful evil and you can be chaotic evil. If you're lawful evil, you're in it for yourself, but you're going to follow a certain set of rules. So that's kind of like the honor amongst thieves sort of thing. Like, I'm not going to, you know, turn in my other thieves, but I'm, you know, not a good person per se. Or you can be chaotic evil, which means I'm in it for myself. Forget all you. I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm completely unpredictable. You have no idea what I'm going to do next. I could do something ridiculous. I could sabotage the entire party. I could poison the entire party. I could poison myself to get sympathy, you know, that sort of thing. No telling what a chaotic evil person is going to do. Generally, chaotic evil won't poison themselves, but they might go through and decide to come into a town and kill the first child they see to assert dominance, because that's who they are. So, any questions about characters, their stats, their abilities, any of that stuff? And Mitch Mannix, if you're still here and you do have questions, you feel free to join the Discord voice chat if you do have questions, and that'll be easier for you. It is completely up to you. All right. If there are no questions, then we will move on to character creation and how that works. So, first step in character creation is choosing a race. There are several races that you can pick from, which we can actually see if we go back right here. So, in the player's handbook, we have dwarf, elf, halfling, human, dragonborn, gnome, half elf, half orc, and tiefling. The most common are your dwarf, elf, halfling, and human. Slightly more obscure and rare are your dragonborn, gnome, half elf, half orc, and tiefling. So this it just comes in because we're following the player's handbook. If you could follow the general structure of Dungeons and Dragons by and create your own things, your own world. So there are things that follow the Dungeons and Dragons campaign or mechanics, the core mechanics, that is like Star Wars. So you have Star Wars characters that you can be, or other stuff. But it is, generally, you're going to be in this realm when it comes to races. That's up to your dungeon master. Thanks. Thanks for trying to just get the information out there and just have it saved, and then I don't know, people can listen to it if they feel like it. Um, the if your dungeon master creates a specific world that has different things that you can do and be, then you might have different races that you can choose from. Generally, it's easier for everyone to just stick to the stuff in the player's handbook or the basic rules. There are other resources that provide other races that have been created by Wizards of the Coast, but generally you'll see a lot of stuff in the player's handbook, just because all the player characters can buy it and have access to it, and then they don't have to rely on all the information provided from the dungeon master. But you'll choose a race, and so we'll just pick a race at random here. Let's go ahead and pick the halfling, and you'll have different things that you'll get, different traits from the halfling. So there's all this information that the player's handbook has, and it's also in the basic rules. So the basic rules is, I believe it's free. The basic rules. So if you are dude like D&D Beyond, which is what I'm on right now, I've purchased the player's handbook through D&D Beyond, but they also have the basic rules. It has most of the same information. There's some extra stuff in the player's handbook, so there's additional spells, additional features, and stuff like that that aren't in the basic rules. But you can get a general overview with the basic rules. So it just gives you some background on it. It's flavor text more or less, but so stuff like tells you how tall they are. So 3 feet tall, weighing between 40 and 45 pounds. So it gives you a general range of when you're creating your character, what they're going to be. So you could be an incredibly light one, so scrawny, or you could be incredibly thick. Like you could be a 70-pound halfling that's just a roly poly that eventually your player characters use you as a bowling ball down a ramp into a bunch of skeletons at the bottom because you're just so round and basically working like a boulder more or less. So that's different things that you can do based on what your features are. Going back to what I was talking about with the silver hair, if you work with what you've created your character, you're gonna have a lot of fun. You really are. Gives you different information about how they feel about other races and how other races feel about them. So they feel about dwarves. Dwarves make loyal friends, and you can count on them to keep their word. But would it hurt them to smile once in a while? So that's just a thought you can have in your mind about how your particular character might feel about a different race. But different examples of names that you can come up with. You can come up with whatever name you want. You could call yourself Alfred, the creator of all death and eternity, and be a halfling that sits around and strums a lyre. You can be named whatever you want. The limit in Dungeons and Dragons is basically your imagination and the world the dungeon master has created or is utilizing. So each race will have something that affects an ability score. So when we're talking about, I closed it. When we're talking about our ability scores, it's going to add a modifier to it. So when I pick my ability scores, let's say that this is what I picked. The halfling gives you +2 to dexterity. So this would be a 16 instead of a 14. And this actually tells you what this particular character has. So they've got a +2 modifier from their racial bonus. So their base is 12. They got a +2, puts it at 14. So age, again, more just for flavor and stuff like that. So you can be really young or really old. So if we're thinking like Lord of the Rings. In the Hobbit books, Gimli was considered too young at age, I think, 60 or something like that. Too young at age 60 to go off with the dwarves to liberate Erebor, which that's just how it is with that particular race. So halflings, they're adults at about age 20, so similar to humans in that regard. Yeah, and will live to about 200 something is what they're saying for the halflings there. General alignment, so your typical halfling will be lawful good, but you could have a different alignment than that. Most of the stuff in there is suggestions of how you can think, all right, I'm building my first character, first ever. What do I want to do? What do I, where should I go? All right, well, adulthood, age 20. All right, I guess I'll make him 30 because that's easy. Alignment, mostly lawful good. All right, we'll do lawful good. Or maybe I don't want to go all the way lawful good, so I decide to do neutral good instead. Size, so how tall they are, how much they weigh. Your size is small, so that talks about how much space they take up. So there's other different movement things in combat where if there's a creature that is twice your size, so or 2 times greater than your size, so there is a minute, so from smallest to largest: minute, tiny, small, medium, large, giant, colossus, not colossus. Ooh, don't remember that one. But so, for instance, a large creature, a small creature, could run through the space of a large creature because they're small enough to get in there. Other things that talk about size is whether or not you can grapple them. So, if I'm a small creature, I couldn't grapple a large troll. I could potentially grapple a large or a medium human, but not a large creature. So that's different things that come in. Your size will matter. Also, whether or not you can fit into a particular area. If everyone's medium sized and there's a particular path that will only allow a small or tiny creature to move through it, none of the characters are going to be able to get through there. They're going to have to figure out some other way to get out of there. So base walking speed. So as we talked before, that's how far you can move in combat. Base walking speed is 25. There's different things that can modify that up and down. You could have particular shoes that allow you to move faster, or you could pick. I can't remember if there's any class features that let you move faster. I think there might be. I think the ranger might be able to move a little faster, but I'm not positive on that one. So halflings, they can be lucky, which means that if you roll a 1, so a critical miss, which I can talk more about critical misses because I only briefly went over it earlier, then you can re-roll the die and use it, use the new result, which is generally a good thing if you're rolling a critical miss. When you roll a critical miss in an attack action, what I like to do is I like to come up with some silly or ridiculous way that your character just made a fool of himself by rolling a natural 1. So we had one unfortunate player who had multiple natural 1s over the course of a couple sessions, and so one of them, they had their bow, they had it pulled out, they were trying to shoot somebody, and then they rolled a natural 1. So instead of shooting them, they accidentally let go with their front hand off the bow. The bow came back and smacked them in the face, and they took 1d4 damage. Another time, they snapped the bowstring, and so they had to spend an action repairing their bowstring because it had broken. Critical hits are natural 20. Generally, you get double the attack damage, so you roll twice the number of damage dice. And if you're playing that way, you also could get an extra benefit. So there are critical hit tables and critical fumble tables that, depending on your dungeon master and depending on the particular campaign, you may or may not use, which could provide, um, further benefits or hindrances depending on the situation, which is something that you'd talk with your dungeon master about before you start the campaign. Usually they'll have thought whether or not they're going to use those tables, and will let you know how that's going to be. But as always, if you have a question about your particular campaign, ask your dungeon master. That's what they're there for. They're there to, create the story and let the player characters just have fun and go wild and do crazy things and live, just live vicariously through their characters sometimes. So again, with our example of our halfling, so brave, so their advantage on saving throws against being frightened, so it's harder to frighten them. They're nimble, so move through a space of a creature that is of a size larger than yours. So as I was talking before, with they need to be 2 size larger. Halflings, they only need to be 1 size larger. So a small halfling can move through a medium human space. You can generally move through ally spaces, no problem. It's when you are talking about foes that things really start coming in. It also depends on if there's technically enough space to move around them. So as I mentioned before, a medium-sized creature takes up 5 feet of combat space. 5 feet of combat space, someone could easily move past you. That's an ally or something like that. You're going to let them move past you. If you're fighting in a tight corridor, though, you might not be able to get past them as easily, even though they're on your team. Languages, so they can speak, read, and write Common and Halfling. And so that's, again, talking about who you can communicate with in different situations, which really, again, depends on the campaign. So that might be useful. You might run into some halflings and need a halfling or someone that speaks halfling to be able to effectively communicate. But you also might run into no halflings in the campaign, and you'll have a language that you're just, cool, I know this. It's not doing me any good, though, but I know it. And then most classes have sub races, which give you different ability, some different added abilities. So Lightfoot gives you an additional charisma score by 1, and they can attempt to hide when you're obscured only by a creature at least 1 size larger than you. So you could hide behind your allies instead of hiding behind cover. Stout Halfling has extra constitution and advantage on saving throws against poison and resistant to poison damage, stuff like that. So that's kind of a quick overview of a race and what that looks like. So once you've picked your race, and you can actually, sometimes people like to pick their class before they pick their race, just because they might be like, all right, well, I decided that I wanted to be a sorcerer, so I'm going to want to try and pick a class that boosts my sorcerer stats. So choose race, choose class. Those can be interchangeable, in my opinion. Like I said, most people in my experience like to determine about which class they're going to pick first and then go from there. So classes: Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard. They all have different play styles. They're all, completely different. Your Wizard is not going to go into battle like your Fighter is. Your Paladin is not going to operate in the same way your Cleric does. A Druid is definitely going to be different than a Monk. So it all depends on your play style. So for this example one, is there any particular class that someone wants to see while I go through essentially a class summary? Anything that sticks out to anyone? If not, then we are going to, I think I'm going to go ahead and pick the monk. We're just going to pick that monk there. So again, flavor text. You get some flavor text about the class that you're picking. So monks have this particular ability. They have ki, chi, whatever you want to call it, kai, icky watong, whatever you want to call it, but ki, which lets them do specific things based on their class. So each class will have this table, which shows you level 1 through 20, and it tells you what kind of bonuses you get for each thing. So um, your proficiency bonus, as we talked before, if you're proficient in a yes, yes, Monty Python speak, yes, exactly, exactly. We are the knights who say, "Nee, I will say nee again to you." Um. Anyway, so proficiency bonus. Uh, just if you're proficient in a particular skill or something like that, then you'll add that to that. So if you're making an investigation check and you're proficient and you're 6th level, you'll add +3 to your modifier on top of what your investigation bonus usually is. So martial arts is a specific thing for uh, the is a specific thing for the monk, and this tells you that you're going to use 1d4 for levels 1 through 4. Once you get to level 5, you use a d6 instead, and it just basically gives you a higher and higher maximum value that you can get as you level up when you're using the martial arts. The number of key points, however you want to say it, goes up with each level for that, which is a specific thing that the monk is able to do. Unarmored movement, this is something specific to the monk as well. If you're not wearing armor and you're just wearing like robes or common clothes or something like that, you're going to get a benefit to your movement after first level. So after at second level, you get plus 10 feet. So if we go back to our halfling example that has a base movement of 25, if we had a halfling monk, they would have at level 2, they would be able to move 35 feet, which is the base range for most elves. So now your halfling is keeping up with your elves just because they're a monk and they're just amazing like that. And then it tells you features on the side, and it tells you what you gain when you get to that level. So at first level, the monk has unarmored defense, which is basically the same similar thing to unarmored movement. So when you're not wearing armor, you have a particular armor class as opposed to the armor class provided by the armor. And martial arts, which is what this D4 is coming on. Once you get to level 2, you unlock chi and unarmored movement, and on and on and on and on and on, etc. until you get to like 20th level where you have protect self, which is most of your 20th level features and skills are just going to be the best, and you're going to feel so pleased with yourself if / when you get to level 20 just having that. So similar to the races, it tells you different things. So as a monk, your hit die is 1d8 per level. So your starting hit points at level 1 is 8 plus whatever your constitution modifier is. Once you get higher levels, you'll roll a d8 and add your constitution modifier to the top of that. And that'll increase your maximum health up and up and up and up, because as you level up, you're going to need it because you're going to fight harder and harder creatures and monsters that will do like 20 damage in a blow, and you're going to want that extra health. So proficiencies. So as we talked before, you need to be proficient in certain things. No armor proficiencies, which means that they can't really do good things when they're wearing armor, which based on the level 1 and first level and second level skills that they get of unarmored defense and unarmored movement, you're probably not going to want to be wearing armor as a monk anyway. You're probably going to want to be wearing your monk's robes and just being all flippy, jump off the walls, grab the torch, swing it over your head, throw it down into the fire, and be all cool, land on the point of your toes, and with your pinky out as you sip some tea. Um, that sort of thing. You're just going to want to be just running around like a crazy person. Weapons. So proficient in simple weapons and short swords. So while you can use other weapons, you don't get your proficiency bonus when you're calculating whether or not you hit your target. Usually, you want to stick within your weapon proficiencies when you're picking weapons that you're going to use. So, tools, one type of artisan tools or one musical instrument. That sort of stuff is stuff that happens outside of combat. It can either happen you'll use that in downtime or in social situations. So if you're proficient in a musical instrument, like let's say you can play the harp or something like that, you might be able to gain entrance into a place you normally wouldn't by being a harp player and being like, oh, the king's daughter is having a wedding and they want some music. You go, oh, I can play the harp. Let me play the harp. Now you've just gotten yourself into a situation you wouldn't have if you didn't know how to play the harp. Or artisan tools. So that's stuff like um, it's basically just a tool set that you can use for a particular task. For particular tasks, again, mostly happens in social situations or downtime. Not necessarily, you won't necessarily use those in combat. It has happened, but you don't typically see it happen. Saving throw proficiencies, so proficient in strength and dexterity saving throws, and then proficient in 2 skills from this list. So you'll pick 2 of them and you'll have proficiency when you're doing those. So you might pick acrobatics because you want to be flippy doodad, awesome guy landing on the point of a toe, sipping tea while talking to a cricket and singing, Oh Danny Boy. And stealth because you want to be able to do that without being seen. So you just want to be absolutely crazy with your acrobatic flippy doodads while sipping tea, talking to a cricket, singing "Oh Danny Boy" underneath a cloak while tiptoeing through the tulips by the window. And then you get starting equipment. So there are a couple ways to pick equipment. You can either, as you start, have a set gold value, so you get gold based on your background and your class, and then you buy weapons, or you can just start with starting equipment. So you can start with a short sword or a simple weapon. So stuff you're proficient in, because good. Plus a Dungeoneer's pack or Explorer's pack, which have different items in it. So some of them, I think the Dungeoneer's pack has more rope and different things in it, which you would look at when you're going to pick your character. You go, all right, well, I get to choose between these 2 things. Which one is beneficial for how I think I'm going to want to play? And you start with 10 darts because why not? We should have some darts. Let's throw things at people because it's fun. And then it explains each of the different abilities that you get that you unlock as you level. So unarmored defense. So first level, when you're wearing no armor and not wielding a shield, your armor class is 10 plus your dexterity modifier plus your wisdom modifier, which can be pretty good if you either rolled well when you were rolling for your stats, which we will talk about in a bit, or if you happened to place your points well in general. Or you get another modifier. So dexterity, which I'm pretty sure, yeah. So that halfling example that we had got +2 to dexterity. So that's right there, adding value to dexterity, which will have increased my modifier by at least +1. So different things to think about. That's why I said a lot of people like to pick the class that they're going to be before they pick the race so that they can see what type of bonuses am I going to want to have based on my class. So, and then martial arts, it explains that. So you use dexterity instead of strength for the attack and damage rolls of your unarmed strikes and monk weapons. So monk weapons are your short swords and simple weapons that don't have two-handed or heavy property. And when you're doing that and you're not wearing an armor or a shield, you roll a d4 in place of normal damage of your unarmed strike or monk weapon. This die changes as you move up. And then when you attack, use the attack action with an unarmed strike or a monk weapon on your turn. You can make one unarmed strike as a bonus action. So if I'm holding a dagger in one hand, I attack at them. Ha! And then I punch them with my fist, with my other fist, which is just great. So bonus action is just you get up to one bonus action per round in combat. So like I said before, you move, take an action, and you can take one bonus action. Here's an example. Attack with a quarterstaff. You can also make an unarmed strike as a bonus action, assuming you have already taken a bonus action this turn. So you can have, it just gives you more flavor text, which is more about creating a character and trying to immerse you in the experience itself. So that's an example of a class. That is the monk class. So determining ability scores. So as we said before, these ability scores at the bottom are assigned when you first start a character. So when you're first creating it. There are a couple ways to use ability scores. You can either use the standard set of scores right there, which is you get to place those numbers across all of your abilities however you see fit. Their example here is the fighter who needs strength, so he's going to put that 15 in strength, 14 in constitution because he's going to be in the thick of the battle all the time, and puts the other ones in other places. And then again, you would use, once you've placed your ability scores, you determine your starting hit points based on your constitution modifier, based on wherever you put your number. That is the simplest way to assign values. The other way to do it is you can do what's called point buying or point purchasing, which is you have 27 points available to spend on your ability scores. So you can divide that up however you want, as long as you equal 27. And it tells you how much it costs for each score. So you have scores from 8 to 15. If you want a 15, it's going to cost you 9 points. So if you had 3 15s, that would be your 27 right there. Everything else would have to be an 8, which could work out if you're trying to min-max your character. But you could also just go in the middle range like that. My preferred method, if it says, I don't think it says. My preferred method is to do rolls for, which is right here, for your ability checks. So you'll take 4d6, you'll roll them, you'll get rid of the lowest number, add the rest of the dice together, and that is one of your scores that you can use. You're going to do that 6 times, so you have 6 scores. So let's say that we rolled a... actually, let's see. Let's give an example. Let's... 4d6. So I rolled 4d6. I got a 1, a 5, 4, and a 1 for a total of 11. I dropped the lowest one, which is one of those ones, leaves me with 10. So 10 is one of my scores. I would then do that 5 more times to get what I can do for my abilities, for my scores. Sometimes, it depends, I will decide that you'll do it 7 times and you'll get rid of the lowest value total that you have, which helps boost everything up a little bit. And other times I will decide to I will decide that if your total average when you're done isn't above a certain value, you do it all again. There's a couple different just different ways to do that in general. So once you've determined your ability scores, you will put them in the different abilities based on whatever class that you've picked. So as we talked about with that monk, the monk wanted to have dexterity. So you're going to put probably your highest one in dexterity. You might want to put, another decent one in constitution, strength, and you might just leave these other things for your lower values. Once you've done that, you'll add in any bonuses that you have. So racial bonuses, class bonuses. You'll put those in, and then you'll determine your ability score modifier based on that total. And starting above 10, you get +1, +2 for every 2, all the way up. Is ability scores. As we talked about when we were looking at the character, describing your character, so what they look like, how old they are, how much they weigh, what their backstory is, all of that stuff, comes in and comes together. That's where you would put that in. It really just depends on, how detailed you want to get into it, how invested you want to be. And if you can't come up with stuff, you can always ask your dungeon master. They can help give you suggestions. The dungeon master is not there to be your opponent per se. Yes, they do control all of the opponents that you're going to fight, but the dungeon master is really there to, to help the players have a good time. If the players are not having fun, the dungeon master is doing something wrong. So that's kind of the key, is making sure that everybody has fun. And that being said, though, the players also have to realize that they might be having fun with whatever they're doing, but it might be making the dungeon master not have fun. And if you burn your dungeon master out, you no longer have a campaign and you can't play. So you want to make the dungeon master needs to make sure that what they're doing is fun for the players. The players need to make sure that they're not ruining the experience for the dungeon master as well. Which unless you're blatantly stepping on the dungeon master's toes, or trying to do things that you've been told time and time again you can't do, it's all, it's fun. Anytime I have been running a campaign, I have had fun doing it. The only times that I don't is usually at the start of a session when I'm trying to corral everybody together and just get everyone focused and be like, all right, everyone, we need to focus. We're going to get started. Because again, like I said before, the dungeon master puts time into creating into running the campaign, even outside of what is done in, during the session. So player characters can probably get away with only spending time in session doing things. The dungeon master cannot. The dungeon master will put in at least twice as much time as everybody else when it comes to running the campaign. Choosing equipment, like I talked before, you either choose based on the race and class that you start with. You could start with stuff, or you start with a certain amount of money that you then buy stuff. So different things have different values. One of the more obscure, or not obscure necessarily, but one of the smaller things is what your living conditions are that you particularly choose as a character. So, do you need to have the finery, sip with my silver spoon? I have to have the nicest room ever. That's going to cost you more per day of downtime. Whereas if you don't care and you're like, I'll sleep in the sewers, that's going to cost you way less. But that comes with a give and take. If you're spending your time in the sewers all the time, saving all that money, your character might stink. They might be dirty. They might be shunned by some of the characters, especially if you're in the same city all the time. They're always seeing you in the sewers. They might not think as much of you as the person who lives the high life. That all ties in together. And then once you're done choosing equipment, then it's time to get the party together. So everyone has created their characters. They've gone, they've determined their ability scores, they've described their characters, they've chosen their equipment. This is the time when everyone is finally brought together. Yes, you can do all the character creation at the same time. That can get, depending on how knowledgeable all the players are, can get a bit much for the dungeon master if it's a bunch of new players who have never played before, who are going to have a lot of questions, and it's a larger party size. So you're talking, 5, 6, 7 people that all haven't played before. It's going to be a lot to do all of that at the same time in a session. So you're going to want to break that up a little bit so that you're creating. Also, creating your character not in front of the other player characters can help you and help them with role playing, because you might have information about your character that you've discussed, that you've thought about, you've talked about with the dungeon master, that the other players don't know or you don't want them to know. Like, let's say that your particular character is lawful evil, but you don't necessarily want to know the other players to know that, because you think it might affect the player's decision, even though they should be playing based on what the characters know. You can limit information that way, and it makes things a little bit better. So then you could be taking things, you could be stealing things from your fellow party characters, and they just don't know about it just because of how you've created your character. There are also other times where you will blatantly go through and take things. There was one campaign I was in that we went hunting. We found a rabbit, so we killed the rabbit, and a bunch of the player characters were like, well, can we get a lucky rabbit's foot? Like, can we keep these rabbit's foot? Will they be lucky for us? We asked the dungeon master. And so the dungeon master is like, yeah, it's fine. So each of these people gets one rabbit's foot that is a lucky rabbit's foot, which you can use one time to gain inspiration whenever, at your choice. And then one of the other players, it was like, I would like to steal that person's rabbit's foot. And so they ended up stealing all 4 rabbit's foots, and you had to play as though the other characters don't, you had to play as though your character didn't know that you didn't have the rabbit's foot, which means that in a place where you might have used the rabbit's foot for inspiration, you as a player would have to think, all right, I'm going to use my rabbit's foot, but then you don't have your rabbit's foot, you don't get it, that sort of thing. It's always fun when stuff like that happens. But yeah, coming together, that's it. You'll introduce your character. People get upset with each other because of things. Yeah, so that does happen. But part of it does come down to, again, if you look at the rules over there. So if number 6, if myself, another player or viewer, is making you uncomfortable, or they're being disrespectful, so rule number 4 there, then that is something that needs to be addressed. If, for instance, a particular player is constantly picking on another player's character, and it's getting beyond the point of role playing or storytelling, and it's starting to irritate that other player, that's something that you want to kind of quash. For the most part, in my experience, though, if you're acting as your character would act, and your character is not ruining the experience, and it's creating a good story, then generally people are okay with different things. So in the example I gave where we lost all of our rabbit's foots, we all thought it was hilarious, mostly because the dungeon master had set kind of a higher difficulty class for stealing them, and he managed to steal all 4 of them. So it was just getting funny because he got the first one. It was like, nah, he took it. It sucks for that person. No, he got the second one. Oh, he got the second one. Oh, no, he's going to do. And then he ended up getting all four of them. And we were all just like laughing because of it. And there are times where a particular player might, you know, because of what's happened in the game, not be enjoying the game as much. And you need to evaluate, is there something that could have been done differently that would that would have made that situation better, or is this something that needs to be addressed with the player themselves? Like, are they not fitting in with the party that you have in the campaign? And that needs to be evaluated. There was a campaign, the same campaign that I was had created with the um, the mage who sent everyone back in time, sort of thing. I had come up with this great idea for this for essentially a forest of shadow and madness, which would basically make people crazy. And the idea was that, like, I had set the difficulty class such a way that it seemed like probably, you know, 30% or half of the party would be subject to this particular effect that I had created for this forest, and it ended up that only one of the player characters was subjected to it, and the effect was such a way that it basically removed them more or less from the combat. And so that was something that I did bad on my part, is I didn't think about the true effect of what I was trying to create. I was trying to create something nice and storytelling that was going to be good. It was going to incapacitate half of the party, and they were going to have to scramble and try and figure things out. But it ended up just being me. How do I, in the story, get him back in so that he's involved again? And so that's the sort of stuff that really, that needs to be thought about um, for things. If everyone's having fun, though, um, really anything can happen. Anything can happen at all, as long as, in my opinion, if everyone's having fun, nobody's making anybody uncomfortable, nobody is strong arming the party, then that's totally fine with me. Like, you do what you want to do, and if it's able to be done in the realm of the world, I will allow it to happen, or allow you to try. Because there is one of my favorite phrases that I use is, someone says, "Hey, can I do this?" And my response is, "You can always try." Um, and which is just fun, because that was what I said with the one person who suffocated that guard by basically making out with them. Is they said, they said, "Can I do this?" And "You can always try." And it happened to work out. And again, it's a lot of fun, and it's, you know it can be very funny, and you can come up with some great stories that people share together. Like the one character player that I was talking about that kept getting those natural ones, so those critical fails. So they were still having a great time, and part of that was because of how the other players were reacting to it. That, everyone was kind of enjoying the humor of this particular character. This particular character is just having such a rough time in this combat. They broke their bow, they smacked themselves in the face with the bow, they went to throw a dagger, they ended up hitting a tree instead, sort of thing, and it got stuck. Or they cast a spell and they missed, and it turned a tree to basically glass. And which they ended up turning around later. They were like, I break the tree, I get the glass, I use that as a weapon, sort of thing. Because just the way that things were described, both on my end and the other player characters, it still made that situation where their character wasn't doing well, that they were still having fun. Which, again, that is the key. That's why rule number one is have fun. If you're not having fun, somebody is doing something wrong, and it needs to be addressed. So that's basically most of the rules there. Multiclassing, I did not talk about that. I need to talk about that, and I'll give a brief overview of some of these time and other stuff. So like I said before, starting equipment, that stuff. If you start with wealth, then you will purchase things and you'll purchase your equipment that way. But we'll go over to multi-classing. So when you level up, you don't have to level up in the class that you started with. You could level up in a different class. So if we go back to our halfling monk example, at level 1, they're a halfling monk. And so they've got that unarmed defense and their martial arts. Let's say they decide, but I want to be able to do some spell casting too. So when they level up, they can level up in the monk, or they can level up in any of these others as long as they meet certain prerequisites for that. So if they wanted to be a wizard, let's go over to our prerequisites here. They would have to have an intelligence of at least 13. If they do, they can level up as a wizard. So then they would be a level 1 monk, level 1 wizard. So their total level is level 2. So when we're thinking about when the dungeon master is thinking about encounter difficulty, they would view them as a level 2, but they would have the benefits of level 1 of both the monk and the wizard. You could then move up each of the different things. So you level up again. Let's say you pick monk twice. Now you're level 3 monk, level 1 wizard. Then you pick wizard again. You're level 3 monk, level 2 wizard. Or you want to add in a druid. So I'm a level 3 monk, level 1 wizard, level 1 druid. That is a strategy you can use. It's not always advised to divvy up between too many classes, because usually once you get into the higher levels in a class, that's when you start getting some of the real powerful stuff for that class. But it could be a viable strategy. If I was a monk and I leveled up from level 1 to level 2 and I chose to do something else, I will never get to be a level 20 monk with a level 1 whatever else. I will never get the benefits of being that level 20 monk. So that's kind of the trade-off you make when you decide to multi-class. Along with multi-classing, there is feats. So feats are like particular things that you've trained because you've experienced it a lot, or you spent the time working toward it. It's an additional benefit that your character can get, and it depends on if your campaign is playing with or without feats and other requirements for the feats. So some of the feats are listed below. So alert, so you gain +5 bonus to initiative. So you're pretty much going to be going fast most of the time early in the round. If you're conscious, you can't be surprised. So even if someone sneaks up on you, you're not surprised. And what surprise is just means that if you're surprised, you miss your first round in combat. So it goes through the entire combat order, gets to your turn, you're surprised, it just skips to the next person. Second round, everyone acts just fine. So athlete, actor, charger, crossbow expert, other different things that people can, feats that you can have with that. Again, depends on if you're playing with feats and whatnot. So this is more information on spell casting with multi-classing. It's how many spell slots and stuff you have based on the level that you are in that particular thing. So you'll know 2 first level spells if you're first level, and that 3 first level if you're second level, third level you have 4 and 2, and so on and so on. And so time, movement, the environment, and social interaction. Time is always passing in a game, and it's kind of up to the dungeon master's discretion how much time has passed. There are certain campaigns that will go through and say that as each act, like during the time that the session is going on, that it equates to X time in the in the game world. One of the most specific times that it gives for actual thing is during combat. Each round, so everyone taking an action, is 6 seconds. So because everything is technically happening at the same time, once the first gets back to the first person's turn, 6 seconds have passed in that combat, which is useful for when you're thinking about um, spells that take time to cast or spells that last for a certain length of time. Um, but that is time. Movement. So when you're moving across a different terrain, you might be able to move faster or slower. Again, it depends on the dungeon master or what you're going to do. They might just say that you travel and you make it to some place, or they might describe the travel, but how fast you're moving might determine whether or not you get an encounter while you're on the road, which again is determined by the dungeon master. Um, Typically by a die roll they will make, and if it's a certain value or greater, then an encounter will occur. Otherwise, it won't. Which is why it's always fun as a dungeon master to just start rolling dice when people are talking, because then they get all like paranoid because they're like, "Oh no, he's rolling dice. What's going to happen? What's going on? What's coming up? Is something going to attack us? What's going on?" So, just kind of fun to help add some extra environment for the players through that. There's a bunch of other information, but again, most of that will be specific to whatever campaign you're playing and whatever race and class you happen to choose for your character. Um, and like I said before, ask your dungeon master questions. Generally, your dungeon master will have more reference books than what you have or have access to, and so they might have more detailed information or just more information in general about a particular thing. um, I I do recommend that if you have the time, at least reading through the basic rules, which again I believe is free on dndbeyond.com. Or if you're really thinking about getting into Dungeons and Dragons in general, I would recommend purchasing the player's handbook, which has more detailed information than what the basic rules have. And the Dungeon Master's Guide is also incredibly useful for anyone who's thinking that they might want to run their own campaign, or anyone who just wants more information about the game itself. It provides extra detail and information for a player character to read through that. Someone who doesn't think they're going to be a DM, it can be useful because it tells it helps inform them of the different things that the dungeon master is thinking and going through and all of that other stuff. But that is basically all that I had planned to go over today. Um, I am really hoping that we'll be able to get a decent number of people together so we can do an actual campaign. Hoping to do something on Saturday mornings like this during this time, probably from 9 to noon Eastern Eastern time, and we will probably end up using Roll20 um, to run that if we do something that's online. But I guess real quick I can talk about Roll20. So this is what the dungeon master will see, or the game master, as Roll20 refers to it. This is the entire dungeon, and some of this stuff is hidden from the players. So if I were to rejoin as a player, real quick, I would only be able to see the information that I'm in the wrong. Let me change where the players are first. So we're going to move players there. All right. Now let's rejoin as a player. Let's try that now. So now as a player, I can only see the stuff that the dungeon master lets me see. So I only see this amount. As my character moves, I might be able to, see more, and it'll reveal more, which the dungeon master will be able to do here. But like that entire dungeon is basically hidden, which is nice because there's different information that happens, and the dungeon master can keep certain things hidden as well. So like there's different layers that the dungeon master can use so that you either see it or you don't. So GM info overlay is stuff that only the dungeon master can see, which is these things that are slightly, opaque. Only the dungeon master can see them. So let's. But if they decide they can change the layer, they can move it to the token layer, and now everyone will be able to see that as long as they're not in Fog of War. For that, it has its own built-in chat thing. If you don't have dice or the dungeon master doesn't trust your dice rolls because they think you're lying all the time, you can always just type in, /R or /roll and whatever die you want to say. So 1d20, it'll roll a d20 and it'll give me a value for that. Something else that it has, if I can get there is I think I'll have to do one of the other campaign things real quick. Roll20.net. Something else that it has is a character sheet. So if I have this character, come on. This character. I can view their character sheet somehow. Where are you at? There we go. Character sheet. Okay. So something that this has is it has the character sheet, and if we go to the pull it back up. Come on. So we look at that chat thing. I can actually cast or use a weapon just by clicking on it, and it'll automatically roll for me. So it says that I got -2 to my dex. So I got a 3 minus a 2 plus a 2. So I got a 3 to hit. So I probably missed whatever I was shooting at. But if I would have hit them, I would have rolled for 16 damage. Oh, no, sorry. I lied. That is not what that's. That's advantage, disadvantage. Gotcha. That's what that is. And then I should be able to, if I click the dagger, then it'll roll damage for me. So happens to get 0 damage when rolling with that. But there's different things. You can talk to just a specific person in that chat. You can talk to just the game master through that chat. So if you type whisper game master, then you'll send that to the GM, and only the GM will see it, and they'll be able to respond to you in that way while still being able to maintain the rest of the campaign and the other players. So it's a nice little feature. Oh, that is a nice little feature that we added in to one of our characters. They had in their backstory that they were a terrible shot, which they said that, and so that was the thing that they were coming up with their backstory, so they're a terrible shot as their flaw. And so we had a discussion of, well, how do we want to manifest this? How do we want this terrible shot to be manifested? So I came up with a couple options, and I asked the player what they wanted to use for it, and they ended up going with that they have disadvantage when attacking with thrown or fired projectiles. Improvised weapons such as a thrown chair, book, etc. are excluded from this penalty. So if they're firing a bow or throwing a dagger or something like that, doesn't matter. They have disadvantage on that attack because they're a terrible shot. So that's something that we came up with together. That's why it's always useful to talk to your dungeon master about different things. That is that. I think that's everything. The campaign I'm hoping to run is called Curse of Strahd, which is fantastic in my opinion. It's gothic horror and wonderful. If you plan on joining in on the campaign at all, I recommend not looking into it because it's more fun if you're just surprised. But a quick summary of what it is basically you are fighting Dracula, more or less. Like you're fighting a vampire, Curse of Strahd. So I'm super excited because I get to do all this dark stuff and sinister stuff that'll make people jumpy. And something particularly with that campaign, though, it will definitely be stated out there that if you're uncomfortable, if you're getting uncomfortable or uneasy because of what's going on to the point that it's not fun anymore, obviously you'd have to let me know, because the whole idea of it is to make the player characters a little uncomfortable with it. That's part of that particular campaign. So it's a balancing act with that sort of stuff. So, are there any other questions, comments, criticisms, snide remarks that people have with any of this that I can answer for them now? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll go over cover real quick as well while we're talking about it. If you're standing behind stuff, you have different cover. Save the VOD. I will save the VOD because I will probably just send it to, if people go, hey, I want to play, but I don't really know how to play. I'll be like, here, watch this. It's 3 hours of me talking, and it contains most of the information. Watch that, or read the player's handbook, and then come to me for questions. But real quick, cover. So half cover basically just increases your armor class, makes it harder for people to hit you, and that is described more in the Dungeon Master Guide of what determines how much cover someone is in, and so they can add on +2 to the armor class, +5 to the armor class, or they can't be targeted directly for any of that. So if there aren't any other questions at all, you all right there, dog? If there aren't any other questions, I will be ending the stream there. I am available through the Discord or through Twitch. You can send whispers to whispers, and I can answer any questions. Like I said, I'm hoping to get campaign going, starting sometime soon once I get enough dedicated players who are available at basically the same time. I'm looking for probably four player characters would be a decent number to go with, and then we'll get the campaign started. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you learned something. I hope that I was able to get you excited or more excited or interested in Dungeons and Dragons, which, like I said at the top, is, in my opinion, one of the greatest games of all time. And I always love when I get a chance to play it. So thanks for stopping by, Mitch. We will catch you all later.